I have a lot of experience, and I've watched a lot of changes. And I see that we're not doing very well, that we seem to be moving farther and farther away from what would be good for our grandchildren and their children. And so I think that the instructions for people is be respectful for life, appreciate what you have, share what you have, and make up your own mind about things. It's very difficult to deal with a whole nation that's instructed to be greedy. You know, how do you deal with that? To be mindful of yourself and your own doings and to secure everything for yourself and to become, as they pointed out a few days ago, one of the billionaires of the world. They promote that, and they say that's great, and they say this is what you should be striving for. But we look at it differently. That amount of wealth in this time in life in Earth is a lot of influence, and a handful of people with that amount of influence. I mean, they piecemeal stuff, and they can't say that they're bad people, but we don't say that at all. We just say that their instructions seem to be directed in the wrong way. And familiar with the processes of foundations and people trying to get money for this and that, and poor Indians and so forth, and that maybe we're more of a problem. I mean, the whole process of the United States history has been to assimilate us, and of course it's a question of land. So we've been fighting this whole issue of land claims. You know, in 1492, we owned all of North America and owned it in the broad sense in that it was in our caretaking, and no one owns the land. It always belongs to your children and your grandchildren. So we were protecting it in their interest. Well, a whole different thought came here. And when they first said they wanted to buy land, our leaders laughed and they said, "How can you buy land?" They said, "That's like buying water or buying air. You can't buy land. Land belongs to everybody." But certainly not. And today we can see, yes, they do buy land. And you can fly over America and you can see all the squares, but all this land is bought. And so I don't know what the answer is to all of this, except that under the leadership of this country right now, we're going downhill fast. And I think that this present administration is acting in a criminal manner and not telling the children or protecting the children and grandchildren's interests. And that's really criminal. I mean, that's going against our instruction entirely. He's not protecting life. He's promoting the interests of business. And their interest is profit. So we're in a problem. And the consequence of which we look at. The present state of the world is very serious in terms of its health and how the health relates to us. I think we have to understand something here, and that is that the earth can deteriorate and ultimately lose its life-giving forces, and it can change and become barren, or it can change and become snow. It has its own direction. It has its own will and ability, and we're part of that. And so right now I see two big areas of concern. Some time back, when Einstein was asked a question about what is the most powerful law of the universe, he said it was the law of compound. I come to the conclusion that it's kind of like an explosion in reverse. It starts slow and ends fast. So compound are in two that I see. And one is a compound of the ice melting, and the other is a compound of human population. Both are moving and accelerating. Both are under their own direction. It doesn't seem like there's a control factor here. And so we have to somehow get to that point of unity of thought and direction and effort. And if we can do that, we certainly can mitigate what's going on now. You know, when we're concerned is for the children and their grandchildren and their children. Peacemaker said, you know, that we're responsible and that we should be always watching. But this whole country is fixed on the idea of sports. It's fixed on the idea of distractions and human titillation, if you will, or whatever it may be. And they're not looking at the large pictures. And they've become insulated against the realities of the world. Even our poor people in the U.S. would be wealthy in any other part of the world. And we're just maybe 1/5 of the population of the whole world, and yet we're using 1/4 of all the resources. So I think we have to adjust and be alert and aware. We have to get a message to the people, and they have to understand the seriousness of this situation right now, this compounding of human population. And the prophecies being that this will happen if you don't do this, or this will happen if you drop this. So it always leaves the option to the present. It always leaves the option to the current generation. And I think that's the importance of these prophecies. Enlightenment is when you suddenly perceive something and you see it for what it is, and you understand it, and it's clear. And I thought, it's probably could be like this group of men that went out on a fishing boat on Montauk Island, and such a nice day, they said, let's go swimming. And of course not realizing that Montauk is a runway for the great white shark. And they're out there splashing around, and one of the men happens to see a fin, a very large proportion, bearing down on him. Now that would be a period of enlightenment. He would see everything clearly. And hard to say what you would think about in a time like that. I should have stayed home. I should have never went swimming. I shoulda, woulda, coulda. It's an old saying, isn't it? Well, that's where we are. We're right there. To understand the earth and to understand these great systems that govern life here, it's fundamental to indigenous people, no matter where they are, to continue that association and that relationship to the earth. The earth is alive. All life comes from the earth. Our life, everything that you see here, the chairs you're sitting on, the clothes you're wearing, everything comes from the earth. We produce nothing. We've managed to take the resources of the earth and do what we've done, and hence have brought us to a position of crisis today, way beyond what people are willing to look at. We spoke to the issue of relationship and to the issue of respect, because that's the only way that we know how to maintain some of the integrity that it requires to keep the earth in balance. So balance is the key, and also understanding the powers of the universe that controls our lives and our well-being. Because of our intellect and because of our capabilities, we're responsible. That was a discussion about responsibility to the future. This is an old earth. It's gone through a lot of phases. And as my late friend, good friend, John Mohawk said, Well, the way I see it, he says people are still a biological experiment.
And that you indeed are in charge of life as it is at the moment. Every generation has its time, and every generation has its leaders, and every generation has its heroes. Every generation has all of that. And when that generation passes, the next generation will have the same. They will also have their leaders, they will also have their heroes, they will also have their problems, and they will also have the continuing responsibility to look out for the next 7 generations. You have to raise your own leaders. They're not going to come out of the air. They're not going to come from what you can see around now. You got to start it just the way a little plant grows. You got to do that. Raise your leaders. You watch children play, and it doesn't take you very long when you can see who the leader is. Well, now you have to guide that person. And you have to deal with that person. And you have to recognize that that person really understands. And so maybe by the time they're a little child, whether it's a boy or a girl, you've been observant for 19, 25 years. It comes time to move, and you walk in and you know who you're talking to. You know, as we sit here and we look about us, there are these flowers, and no tree grows by itself. A tree is a community. Certain trees, certain plants will gather around certain trees, and certain medicines will gather around those certain plants. So that if you kill all the trees, if you cut all the trees, then you're destroying the community. You're not just destroying a tree, you're destroying a whole community that surrounds it and thrives on it, and that may be very important medicine for people or for animals, because animals know the same medicine. They use this medicine. Well, that's where we learned. We learned, by watching the animals. They taught us a lot. Where is the medicine? They tell you because they use it themselves.
And then if you step back and look at the universe, you see that we're revolving. And it doesn't take very long, if you move away from the earth, for the human species to become a speck and to disappear. You don't have to get very far away. So we're these little mites populating the earth, overtaking the earth, out of balance. The earth will bring balance, because that's what it does. It'll do it through disease, it'll do it through crisis, lack of food, lack of resources, exploitation of energy.
And you will sit in council, and he said, we call this the council of the good minds. And he said, and the women who are fundamental to life and female, as we all look around and we talk about the seed. Well, this is the female again, you see down here. This is her work. Her work. I mean, without it, we all have seed. We're seed at one time, ourselves. Comes from the two, the partner, the male and the female. Everything you see here is in twos. Nothing is by itself. Nothing can move by itself. This is his instruction. And so the female carries life. She is fundamentally important. Without the female, there is no life.